Hello, I'm Pira Nada. Welcome to another episode of the Leader I Want series, a series of one-on-one interviews with 2019 electoral candidates. And today we have with us former presidential spokesman Harry Roque. Welcome, sir.
Yes, good morning, Pia, and good morning to everyone.
Yeah, so sir, the last time we spoke, we were in Malacanang. You were the spokesman and you were defending the president's ban on Rappler. And now here we are talking and you're running for senator. So sir, what is your outlook now for 2019? How are you feeling with the elections fast approaching?
Well, the last time we talked was 2 days ago in the signing of the Hugpong na Pagbabago and PRP affiliation. No? But I'm great. I've always wanted to go get a mandate again directly from the people. It's not my first time to get the people's mandate. I was number 6 out of 115 party list in the 2016 elections. And I guess once you've tried getting the people's mandate, it's kind of addicting. It's something that people don't really understand, but I do appreciate going around, asking people for the mandate, going to every corner of the Philippines and seeing firsthand, the conditions in the different regions of the country. So I would say I'm happy with the process of getting the people's mandate, and I'm excited to return or resume my work as a legislator anew.
Mm-hmm. So, sir, one of the questions in people's minds now is who is Harry Roque? Because you spent a year as presidential spokesman and you were parroting statements from the Malacanang, some very controversial statements, and some statements which contradict your previous positions as a human rights lawyer or as someone who lobbied, for example, for the International Criminal Court membership of the Philippines. So people are wondering, with that year over, who is Harry Roque and what stances can we expect him to take if he is elected as senator?
I'm 52 years old. I've been an activist since 16, and the 1 year in Malacanang was a job. That's why I'm actually disturbed that people think I've changed because I became spokes. What did they expect? Did they want me to go around telling them about my personal opinions when I was supposed to be speaking for the president? Of course not. When I accepted the position, I knew we had enough basis of commonality. Among others, it's a independent foreign policy. It's the political will to effect changes in the Philippines. And of course, the fact that when I was legislator, the president was very supportive, resulting in 7 of my bills being enacted into law, which would not have been possible had it not been for the fact that many of the bills that I enacted into law became part of the administration legislative agenda, and one of them had to be certified urgent just to prompt the Senate to pass this. And this is my most important legislation, universal healthcare, which I had passed even before I transferred to Malacanang at the House, but it took the senators more than a year. And we actually had to race against time, and the only solution really was a certification of urgency, which the president gave. So I can look anyone in the eye now, even my fellow activists, and I can tell them I think I have done a better job at promoting human rights. Why? Because my universal health care promotes the right to life and the right to health. My free irrigation promotes the right to livelihood, the right to food. My free lunch program for children promotes the rights of the child and the right to food. My free Wi-Fi promotes the right to connectivity. My law amending AIDS, the existing AIDS bill, which provides for criminal sanction against those that will discriminate against individuals with HIV/AIDS, promotes the right to equality, the right to health, and of course my anti-endo bill, although it has not been passed as a law per se, I passed that in the House, and that was consistent with the president's promise to do away with all forms of endo. The version that I passed amends expressly the provision of the labor code, that allows labor-only contracting provided the company has sufficient capital and manpower. I did away with that, so it's the bill that the president wants, except that it hasn't been passed by the Senate. So I think, given that I was an activist from 16 till my appointment to the palace, that I have actually done more now using institutions in promoting human rights than I could have had I stayed in the streets as an activist. So I can look anyone in the eye and say, I think I've done my share.
But sir, I think it's helpful also for the public to kind of go into these issues one by one. Himayin po natin yung issues to make it crystal clear for them exactly where you stand. Because, syempre, as voters, they would like to know,
Sure.
diba, what is Harry Roque's answer to these issues, to these questions. So, sir, let's go one by one, starting with the anti-drug campaign of the president. So, sir, what are your thoughts, you as Harry Roque, a senatorial candidate, on the president's messaging? For example, his kill threats, his threat to shoot human rights defenders. As a former human rights lawyer, do you think this kind of messaging should be tempered? Do you agree with these kinds of?
See, yours is a conclusion, but the president's messaging is very clear, and it was made apparent in the case of Kian. he made it very clear that he supports fully the policemen if they are in the discharge of their official duties. No, he never defended the policemen in the Kian killings because he saw the evidence for himself. And it's very difficult to be a former prosecutor and lawyer, ignore the laws of evidence. And that is why when he was asked recently if he's going to give amnesty or parole to the policemen, he said not in a billion years because he does not sanction murders. And that is why I joined him. It's difficult for people to appreciate that the president as a lawyer will not tolerate killings because of his colorful language. But you need to understand that he is a political creature. It's a kind of talk that I think he has concluded is something that the people want to hear because people want to exercise political will in dealing with the drug problem. Now, why do I support the drug issue, no, the drug campaign? Because for the past 30 years, I've been one of the founders of one of the most successful rehab initiative now. It's called Onesimo Foundation. We founded it more than 30 years ago. We believe in small groups, faith-based therapeutic communities, and I know the kind of conditions that exist in these communities afflicted with the drug problem. I know too that although our approach is different, ours is faith-based and professional-based, no, and care-based, that there are instances when you have to use really the force behind the state, no, in dealing with the drug menace, no. So to me, the use of force is perfectly legitimate, provided that the use of force is proportional and there is necessity in the use of force. And as shown in the case of Kian, if there's no necessity, if there's no proportionality, the president will support the criminal prosecution of policemen.
But sir, his statements on Kian are just one among many other statements he's made. For example, he said he'd promote cops who would massacre criminals. He also said that he would shoot human rights defenders. There's no due process in those statements.
Yes,
so, sir,
but
can you
you already
clarify?
need to go beyond the language, and having covered him,
But don't
you
you
have
think that language is also
no,
very important?
no, because what matters now is with actual cases, no, that have to be dealt with as enforcer of the law. So despite the call for language of a politician, the bottom line in the case of Kian is as chief implementer of the law, he asks his prosecutors to prosecute and make sure that the policemen who committed murder are punished for their acts. I think that's what matters. You need to transcend the language of a colorful politician and you need to see actually what he does on the ground when it comes to the discharge of his constitutional functions as chief implementer of the law.
So just to be clear, you don't think he should be tempering his messaging?
That's up to him. He's too old to change, as he says, and I think people love him for the way he is. If people don't love him, then explain to me why, despite everything, he remains to be trusted by 70% of our people, and more than 70% have said in surveys that we're headed towards the right direction. In fact, almost 80% approve of the drug war. That's a finding that I personally asked a polling company to conduct about 7 months ago, and it appeared that 80% of the people supported the drug campaign, and it was repeated by SWS with
But
the
I
same
think, sir,
conclusion.
that 70% of them also think that the criminals should be kept alive.
Well, I don't
during
know
these
about
drug
that, no, but
operations.
the question asked was, do they support the campaign against drug? And all of them said yes. No, 80% of them said
Well, I
yes.
think everybody supports naman talaga
Well,
suppressing illegal
because
drugs. It's really the
no,
method, I think,
no
that
government
where people
has ever given the same kind of priority that he has in dealing with the drug menace, and that's a fact. Because to previous administration, this is a police matter that the police can deal with, not knowing how bad the problem is. And I've seen it because I've worked in urban poor communities, in these therapeutic communities. No, you'll be amazed at how vicious the ongoing war in the urban poor areas are. No, and at least now the state is able to intervene and protect civilians. No, of course there may be excesses, but as shown in the case of Kian, gather the evidence, file the cases in court, and the president himself, through the National Prosecution Service, will prosecute. The problem is we need to go beyond blabbering. If you have the evidence, file in court, and as shown again by Kian, the system can work and is working.
Okay, sir, next issue naman tayo, press freedom. So the president during your time and even till now continues to threaten multiple media outlets. It's not just Raptor, it's also the Inquirer, it's also ABS-CBN with their franchise renewal. So sir, do you agree with the president's threats against media?
I don't know what you're saying because as a veteran politician of 28 years, he knows how to deal with the media. So I don't think he has ever considered the media as enemy. I think he's more savvy than that. I think he is his own spokesperson. He is his own PR practitioner. Again, you have to distinguish the language from what he actually does. I've seen how he has dealt with the media. I've seen how he dealt with you when you were covering him in Congress. I saw how he was so concerned when you were injured during the campaign and how he considered you as a granddaughter of sorts. So in my mind, he's just a normal human being, but as a politician, he puts a premium on the relationship. Now, of course, there's rhetorics, but then again, that's why we have the Bill of Rights. No politician, of course, will completely love the media because the job of the media is to criticize. I don't think the media should expect to be loved by any president because that's the nature of the job. So, the protection in turn is provided not by anyone, but by the very Constitution
I don't think we've
itself.
seen a politician Duterte's level of vindictiveness towards
No, I don't
media.
think so. That's,
the cases have been filed. He
that's
is stating
relative.
it publicly on his speeches. He is saying that, threatening the existence, the very existence of media outlets. I don't think politicians,
I don't
other
think
politicians
so.
have gone so far as
He
that.
has never filed libel cases. He has never touched any media as far as court cases are concerned. Of course, Rappler has a problem, but that problem was dealt with by the SEC, and the people who decided that case were not even his appointees, except for one. So I think you cannot claim the SEC case as a violation of freedom of the press. It's the SEC doing its job as an administrative body to implement the Constitution, and the decision of Rappler was in fact upheld by the Court of Appeals. No? So I don't think, of course, he will say otherwise, that it's a press issue. No? He has not filed a single libel case against anyone. It's because he understands that it's a job of the media to criticize. In fact, what he has consistently said is for as long as you're Filipino and for as long as he is a public servant, then they have a right to criticize him and he will accept all criticisms. No?
So
he doesn't have to like it. He verbalizes what he says. In fairness, why would he be criticized and why would the media be offended if he criticizes them back? It's a free market of ideas. So criticize him, he will criticize
Sir,
back.
I think the power play here is very skewed because the president is very powerful, more powerful than these media outlets, and can
I don't think so.
wipe them off the
I
face
don't
of the
think
earth
so.
if he so wished. So
The media will not be
how-
known as the fourth estate if the media is not powerful in what it does. You are the most powerful in forming public opinion, and I think the president knows that. That's why he also calibrates what he says against the media. No? He would not want, as a seasoned journalist, as a seasoned politician, to have an all-out war against the media because he knows that public perception is still formed by the media itself.
So what do you think is the effect of his threats to media during his speeches?
Well, nothing. If you were a
Nothing?
media personnel, it should not affect you. I've represented someone like Jake Makasayat, and Jake says, the more I'm sued for libel, the more I carry it like a medal of valor. So it's really a matter of perception as far as a journalist is concerned. No? If you value your job, the more you're threatened, the more you should be proud of it because obviously you're doing your job, no, in criticizing government, because the role of criticism is to get better governance. You can't deprive the media of that right to criticize because public policy demands that we have better service from government. So the more a leader is upset with a media outfit, I think the more reason the media outfit should think that it must be doing its job.
So banning a media outlet from Malacanang from press conferences, the opportunity to ask him questions, that isn't muzzling press freedom.
That's an interesting issue. On the one hand, of course, you're talking about the most secure building in the country. So access to it is not a matter of right. And of course, there's also the issue of how to maintain good relations with subject. I'm not compelled to give an interview to anyone unless I trust that media person. And I guess the president, by banning you, for instance, has said that I don't trust you in what you do, no? Because he, in his mind, must have thought that you were a purveyor of fake news. So it's not an issue of just all freedoms. There's also responsibilities. I'm sorry to be saying this point blank, but other journalists did not have the same problem as you. They continue to have a relationship with the subject. That's why they continue to be able to ask questions of their subject. No? So in the same way that when I accept interviews, obviously, I don't accept interviews from people who I don't trust will report fairly. So it's really an issue of tempering the exercise of freedom with professional responsibilities. Now, having said that, of course, it's interesting that it became a legal issue in the U.S. And it will reach the U.S. Supreme Court, and we will find out no, what the U.S. Supreme Court will say. But I would say that it's a 50-50 odds of the U.S. Supreme Court declaring the act as being unconstitutional. Because the argument I think to be made is you're not barring anyone from functioning as a journalist because you can still cover the president at this time and age when everything is shown on Facebook,
Sir,
on
it's not the same
C-SPAN.
thing. It's not
But
the
of
same
course,
thing.
the argument on the other side is press freedom includes the right to ask questions. Now, in your case, I never deprive you of the right to ask questions.
But I can't
except
ask the president
except
questions.
once, no? Yeah, but another option that could be exercised, and I don't understand why Rappler has not done it, is simply replace you with another reporter. If
No,
you've
sir.
been banned,
All reporters of Rappler have been banned, even from
I
his
don't know
events.
that. No, I
Yes,
don't
it's
know
true.
that.
We've
But
tried.
it's an interesting legal issue, and I would say that it can go either way, because as I said, what is covered by freedom of expression is any form of prior restraint, any form of content-related restrictions. No? Whether or not physical presence is included in prior restraint is an issue that, the courts would have to resolve.
Okay, so it seems like on this issue, you haven't really changed your stance from when you were spokesman. So let's move on to a different issue. Talking about his misogynist remarks, his sexist remarks, his jokes that have, made people very angry, especially feminists or even, husbands, brothers, mothers, and sisters. I mean, it's been a recurring issue in his presidency that he makes rape threats, rape jokes. So sir, should the president be more careful with these kinds of remarks?
I'm no longer spokes, so please ask the question directly to him. No, as far as I'm concerned, I don't use the same language, so I leave it at that.
But sir, as senator, and you will be part of a chamber who is supposed to check the powers of the executive, what do you think of those kinds of remarks?
That's not impeachable. So as far as I'm concerned, that's covered by his freedom of expression. He wants to speak it the same in the manner that he does. So be it. Eventually, it's a political question whether or not the people will accept him for the kind of language that he uses. But he's been elected using this kind of language already. So I suppose the people have made a judgment. So the bottom line is a matter of personal preference. I just don't talk the same way as he does.
All right. Next issue, sir, the West Philippine Sea and the China approach. Do you think that the president's, for example, joint development plan with China, do you think that this violates our constitution, especially the provision on exclusive resources? Because before 10 years ago, you actually said about the GMSU that it's not constitutional.
Yes.
So
Well, this is not a question to be asked. It's been ruled upon by the courts. Labugal. The case of Labugal, then Chief Justice, what's his name? It has been ruled by the Supreme Court that you can, in fact, engage in joint development, not only in areas which are only covered by sovereign rights, EEZ, even in areas covered by actual sovereignty and jurisdiction. So this is an actual decision of the Supreme Court. It's no longer open for debate. Of course, jurisprudence can be reconsidered, and there's still a pending case on the JMSU, which could provide the venue for the court to reconsider. But unless that decision has been overturned, joint exploration is perfectly constitutional. And that's according to the Supreme Court, not just the president.
Sir, let me just remind you of what you said about the GMSU 10 years ago. You said, my position is that anyone who will give away Philippine territory is guilty of treason. Since the national territory is governed by the Constitution and by law, a president who will surrender the exercise of sovereign rights is guilty of treason, unimpeachable offense.
That was before the decision of Labugal. Check the dates.
So now you've changed your
I
opinion.
didn't change.
Because this is, the
I
GMSU
didn't
is different
change.
from Labugal.
Yes, it's very different. Why? Because it only involves sovereign rights. Labugal involves actual sovereignty and jurisdiction. So you'd think that the court would be more restrictive in entertaining foreign investments because this is actually in Philippine territory, not just in areas covered by sovereign rights. What I'm saying is, court decisions form part of the laws of the land. The court decision is there. Unless it's changed, we're all duty bound to follow it. It's not a matter of having personal opinions. It's complying with what the court has ruled upon. Good luck to Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, because he voted he registered the dissenting opinion in Labugal. And I'm sure he would want that decision reconsidered in the JMSU case, but all I can say is good luck to him, no? Because right now the law is, it is allowed even in areas where we have sovereignty and jurisdiction, and it will more so, with more reason, be allowed in areas covered only by sovereign rights.
So, sir, if you become senator, will you call for more aggressive actions, assertive actions from the Philippines to, for example, oppose aggressive behavior by China in the West Philippine Sea, like Spratlys, yung nangyari sa GMA7 crew, that they were barred from covering that area, yung Panatag Shoal? What would be your action there?
Well, as an international law professor and as an international lawyer, we're all bound by the UN Charter. The use of force is illegal, and of course, there's the principle of non-interference. No? However, what we have here in the West Philippine Sea is really a conflict that has not been resolved even by the arbitral tribunal. What we're talking about here is conflicting claims to land and water territories. And what the tribunal only resolve are issues relating to law of the sea, because that's the only competence of the UN Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. Ultimately, the conflicting claims to land, and it is said and recognized by the law of the sea that land, it is the land territory that generates the seas, must be resolved through diplomatic negotiations. And as far as I'm concerned, because there's no tribunal that can ever take jurisdiction over the issue of conflicting land territory, because that's limited now to the ICJ, and China, I think, will never give its consent to litigate before the ICJ. We need to maintain good relations, because ultimately any diplomatic resolution would depend on the kind of friendship and good relations we have between countries. I'm not in favor of surrendering territory, and the president has not surrendered territory. I'm in favor, though, of upholding the rule of law. Nothing that China does now can ever erase the victory that we have in the ruling of the arbitral tribunal, as far as the fact as, number one, claim to historic titles finds no legal basis under international law, and that the artificial islands are built within our EEZ, and therefore it's only the Philippines that can create artificial islands. But these two rulings will not resolve the problems between us and China. It did not even resolve the issue of fishing rights in Scarborough Shoal, because the tribunal said that three countries have historic fishing rights there, including China, Vietnam, and the Philippines. So whenever there's an issue in the Scarborough Shoal, I repeat, the ruling there is that all countries can fish in the area. Whether or not journalists can operate in an EEZ is really a controversy that I think deserves serious attention, because sovereign rights talks about the right to explore and exploit living and non-living resources, no, as far as natural resources are concerned.
But sir, when we allow China to build weather stations, for example, in the Spratlys or similar features, won't this just...
I don't think we
what
allow
happens
them.
then?
I don't
No, but
think
sir,
they ever.
We're
I don't
not
think.
saying anything against
I don't
it.
think we allowed them. I don't think we ever consented, and I think we're in the process of verifying if there are weather stations there. No, now having said that, yes, we can protest, but outside of protesting, no, do we have the kind of might that would prevent China from doing whatever it has done in the artificial islands? Even the United States could have intervened if it wanted to, because their premise is that it's covered by freedom of the seas. It did not.
But sir, some experts are talking about a way for us to galvanize support among the international community using the Hague ruling to kind of get support so that we could pressure China, maybe not through force of arms, but through their sensitivity to their reputation. And people think that this could be one way, one effective way to...
Rhetorics. I go back to diplomacy since ancient times. So I don't know what galvanizing support would look like, but what has happened in ASEAN is, I think our ASEAN neighbors have recognized that the ways of President Duterte appears to be effective, and they have designated him as the person in charge of dealing with China, which they would not have done if they did not approve of the initiatives of President Duterte. History did not just happen overnight. I mean, history has told us since time immemorial that it's important to maintain good relations, especially with neighbors. And even from a cultural perspective, we have a saying that it's even more important to have good relations with neighbors than with your own relatives. No? I don't think we should have a different position as far as China is concerned. Of course, we have to be vigilant. We have to know that only Filipinos can fight for the Philippine interests. But in the existing conditions, I think maintaining economic and other ties with China right now without provoking China is a better mode of action in furthering Philippine interests.
Okay. Sir, moving on to the ICC. So, of course, we know that the president has unilaterally withdrawn from the ICC, but you before used to be the #1 lobbyist for membership.
I was.
So,
I was president of the PCICC, the Philippine Coalition for ICC. I filed a case to compel the Rome Statute to be submitted for concurrence in the Senate. But I concurred also with the decision of the President. Why? Because the ICC was not established to be a substitute for domestic courts. We have a principle known as a principle of complementarity. It is only when domestic courts are unable or unwilling to exercise jurisdiction over a case that the court should be left with jurisdiction. And it's not just that. No, it must be something that is the most serious offense against international law. And the standard is what happened to the Jews during World War II, what happened to the former Yugoslavia, Bosnia in the former Yugoslavia. So and what happened to the African state with the genocide, the former tribunal for Rwanda, no? Rwanda. No? So it cannot be any less serious than what happened to the Jews during World War II, what happened to the Bosnians in Yugoslavia, and what happened to the Rwandans. No, now either way you look at it, Kian, the conviction of the policeman in Kian proves that domestic courts are able and willing to exercise jurisdiction against crimes against humanities, no? Because that's supposedly the counterpart. No? And therefore, it proves that under no circumstance should any agent of the ICC even take cognizance of any complaint when domestic institutions are working. And I think although it is a preliminary examination, the prosecutor still, and I told her so personally, when I last attended the Assembly of State Party, that she should have desisted. The problem with the prosecutor is she herself is really acting like a politician. She's trying to disprove accusations against her that she has not initiated investigations, even preliminary examinations in non-African countries, and therefore she chose the Philippines and another Colombia as countries that she will conduct a preliminary investigation, just to disprove her critics, no? Well, not at the expense of the Philippine president. She should have taken cognizance of the fact that at least one of the complainants was a politician and was out to embarrass the president, and that even initiating preliminary examination would have the effect of embarrassing the president. To lawyers, to international lawyers at that, and to the prosecutors certainly, the principle of complementarity is very clear, and therefore any action that violates the principle of complementarity violates the basis of our treaty consent. And to me, when the president asked me, go ahead. The ICC is very close to my heart, but because of what the prosecutor did, I think they violated their consent. It's only proper that we withdraw. And now, I talk, of course, to all my colleagues in the ICC, and I ask them, where do you think, or which do you think was a better option for universal ratification of the ICC Rome Statute, no? Before or after the prosecutor's acts? And everyone concedes we're in a worse condition now because only the Philippines was openly advocating for universal ratification in Asia for ratification of the Rome Statute, and they lost their biggest ally.
So, sir, basically, you're sticking with your messaging that the ICC has been politicized and is irrelevant. Is that right? Is that right?
Well, the prosecutor violated the principle of complementarity when she initiated even a preliminary investigation, knowing that domestic institutions in the Philippines are working.
But, sir, the Kian case is just one of many killings that have
Still,
not yet been.
It disproves that our institutions cannot work. Come on. As prosecutor, she knows the areas where she has conducted preliminary investigations. It's, Darfur, Sudan. It's Afghanistan. It's, Libya. You don't even have functioning governments there. That's why you need the ICC. Stop looking at the Philippines because, number one, love or hate the president, he was democratically elected. No one disputes that he had a popular mandate. Number two, love or hate the Philippine judicial system, it's working still. It's not perfect, but you can't say it's not functioning within the contemplation of the principle of complementarity.
So you think the Supreme Court now is still independent?
Of course.
Okay. So, sir, now we go on to exploring what you plan to do as senator and actually delving into how you plan to conduct your campaign, given that all these controversies have been behind you and are continue to hound you. Sir, the spokesman job lasted 1 year, and we know that you admitted you took the job so that you could prepare for 2019. So was it worth it, given that the Pulse Asia survey results showed that even if your awareness rating increased from March 2018 to September, so that's roughly the year you were spokesman, the preference rating went from 8.7 to 7.7. So you slid after that 1 year. So
negligible, within margin of error. Let me correct you. I took in the job because I value freedom of expression, and we know that the component of freedom of expression is the right of the people to freedom to information, FOI. I think that's what I accorded the people by taking on the job of spokesperson, and I hope you can attest to that fact. As much as I could, I accorded the people access to information that affects their daily lives. That's the primary motivation. Whatever side benefits came with the job is just that, a side benefit. Now, going to the Senate, well, this is not my first time to become a legislator. I was there for 16 months, and I'm proud to say that in the 16 months I was there, I passed the most important pieces of legislation before I left Malacanang. Universal health care, free irrigation, free lunch program, amendment to the AIDS bill, and even the anti-endolon. And that's why when the president asked me to stay, I had to tell him, comparing my experience in the executive and the legislature, I have come to the conclusion na mas gamay ko talaga yung policy making. That's who I am. Coupled with the fact that I can't practice any profession or engage in any business in the executive. And I followed that to the letter, no? And of course, I have two kids going to college, so I need to be able to do my share in governance and still pursue private profession so I can support my two kids to college, no? Now, what do I intend to do in the Senate? Simple. In the 16 months I was there, I filed 283 bills of national significance. No local bill because I was a party list congressman. No? What will I give priority now? Number one, I have a bill which has not been enacted, the Right to Food Bill. This seeks to eradicate poverty within 7 years. We will create a national food sustainability council, and it will just spearhead all efforts to discharge the state obligation to provide food for everyone. Now, the feeding program amongst school children is a component of the right to food, but it's not sufficient. Then there's also the right to water. No one has noticed that the price of bottled water now is slowly catching up with the cost of diesel. So it's going to be that expensive. And there's got to be an effort now on the part of government to recognize that we also need water security. I'm one of those also supporting the right to create a separate department for OFW affairs. Why? Because my mother was an OFW. And I know as an international law professor that the relations or the duty of protecting nationals, given the 11 million Filipinos that we have working overseas now, goes beyond the traditional concept of consular affairs. No? We need now to specialize, build a specialized department. After all, we have derived so much benefit from OFWs. They deserve it. No? Then I have a bill that almost made it into law but stopped when I left Congress. This is the right of internally displaced persons. Of course, ideally, we would do away with all forms of armed conflicts in the Philippines, but until we have done so, it's very important to respect the rights of non-combatants, including civilians, and that's one important piece of legislation that I would be pursuing. No? 283 bills, only about 8 have was translated into law. So I have, if need be, all I have to do is to refile all the bills that I've filed, and they're very good bills to pursue as well. FOI. Remember, although the President issued Executive Order Number 1, FOI is only in the executive. Now, we don't need a law to have FOI because the Constitution provides for the right, but a law would still be ideal because we would now provide for a mechanism in case government refuses the release of an information that the people are entitled to. And we also need a law to provide for administrative, civil, and even criminal sanctions for anyone in government that would deprive the people of their FOI right. The rights of whistleblowers is also pending, and that's also a bill that I was principal author of. The rights, I have a bill which expressly protects journalists. It's called the Journalist Protection Act, and it's a bill that seeks to provide journalists the same kind of protection that you would give witnesses to criminal cases. No, after the journalist is able to prove through convincing evidence that there's a threat on his or her life. No, I think it's important to pursue that bill. And there's also a bill where I want the state itself to provide for reparations to victims of all forms of human rights violations. Right now, we have a law which provides for that kind of reparation, but only for victims of martial law abuses. No, I think one way of upholding civil political rights is to accord the same kind of right to victims, to all human rights violations, and not just to the martial law victims. I could go on and on.
Yeah, no, I know, it's fine. Here I go. So, sir, but before we get there, syempre, there's a campaign, and, there's still the challenge of winning that seat. So, sir, given the tumultuous year you had before, and then, people admired you because you were a human rights lawyer, and then they felt that your tenure as spokesman kind of, changed their perception of you. So, how now do you plan to win back those same fans, those supporters?
Well,
what's your strategy?
Again, that's a conclusion that I don't agree with. To begin with, when I was a legislator, my awareness level was 34%, meaning majority of them did not even know who I was. Before I became a legislator, it was 18% as an activist. No? So I'm talking of just awareness. I did not measure then whether or not they liked me. No?
Yeah.
But now my awareness level is 88 of the last survey. And although my conversion is very low, I think it's only because they did not know that I'm running or that I'm interested, because they know me as spokes. And to them, and until now, I get the same feedback. Why did you leave? I mean, no one else can do the job but you. But I have to tell them, look, I did well as a legislator, and I made a decision that I think I'm better off in government as a legislator. So I'm not really worried about the low conversion, because it's easier for me now to work for conversion by telling people what I've done as a legislator in 16 months and the fact that I could do more under a 6-year mandate. No? And to me, it hasn't been difficult at all to convince people, as I predict that in the first polls to be released after filing, I would have a substantial increase in terms of conversion.
Okay.
I'm so confident of that.
All right. Sir, now we go to the last part of our interview. Basically, I want to just ask you about issues, and I was hoping you could give me a yes or no and maybe a very short
Sure.
explanation on these issues. So, sir, do you support martial law extension?
I don't know because I'm not privy now to information. No? When I was a member of Congress, I supported the initial extension, but because we had a very thorough one-day briefing from the security forces.
Okay. Do you support same-sex marriage?
Yes.
Okay. How about legalizing divorce?
Yes.
Okay. Sir, how about Senate independence? We know that very important to have an independent Senate. We have two senators who have been attacked by the president. How do you think the president can preserve its independence in this environment?
It's the senators who should fight for independence. And you can't invoke independence when you're accused of a criminal crime. Commission of a criminal crime, because being a senator does not give you any form of immunity from the commission of criminal acts.
Is there any issues, sir, apart from the death penalty? We know that you disagree with the president on that, but are there other issues where you disagree with the president on?
Lowering the age of criminality. I supported the House compromise version that there could be responsibility as far as minors are concerned, but we should do away with imprisonment, because the best way to ensure that juvenile offenders become criminals is to send them to jail. So I supported the initiative of Congresswoman Pia Cayetano that we should instead consider them as children, and that if the parents cannot provide the proper parenting to them, then it is a DSWD that should exercise parental control and authority,
Okay.
but not to send them to jail.
All right. Sir, how about federalism? Do you support the push for federalism?
I have a solid legislative record for local autonomy. I filed two bills, the BRAVE budget reform for village empowerment, seeking to provide for more development funds to local government units, 1 billion to every province, 500 million to cities, 300 million to municipalities, and 5 to 7 million to barangays, and the Magna Carta for barangays, recognizing barangay captains as regular government employees. I also lawyered for two cases. The first one, Mandana's case, where the court ruled that the computation for IRA is wrong. It should include customs duties and other national forms and taxes. And apparently, a second case where I just lost, which is the right of local government units to receive 40% gross share from natural resources. And I understand Palawan just lost the case, and I lawyered for Palawan. No? So the fact is, having been in Congress too, that right now, the national government, even with congressmen, cannot provide for the daily needs of the constituents, of the people, at least in the same manner that local governments could. And that's why I'm supportive of federalism. Having said that, I think the form of federalism that I want is too complicated. And having worked in Congress, it's just too much effort to get the kind of amendments that they want right now. So I want to simplify matters. If there's going to be constitutional change, it should be limited to the amount of IRA. It should be 50-50 at least. The entitlement of local government units to natural resources, which should be at least 50-50. And the power to tax without the consent of Congress. I don't think we should touch anything else if we really want to have charter change to promote local autonomy. The most realistic is amend those three.
So you're not for a total revision, but just
No,
amendments of key?
it just will not happen.
Why
It's
do you
just
think
too
so?
complicated. It's hard enough to pass ordinary legislation in the House only. I realize that even if you're good at passing in the House, there's still the Senate to deal with. And most of my bills got delayed because the Senate took years to act on my bills. No? Whereas I finished my 7 bills within the 16 months that I was in Congress. No? So let's be realistic. From what I know, it will not happen because the nature of Congress itself, including the House and the Senate, is a deliberative. And when you refer to it as deliberative, it never ends. The arguments never end. So simplify issues. It's important to promote local autonomy and propose as little as possible revisions to the Constitution if you want it to happen.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. That ends our interview.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here and for answering our questions. That was former presidential spokesman and now senatorial candidate Harry Roque speaking to us at the Leader I Want Rappler series of interviews. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, I'm Pia Renada, and thank you for watching.